Electronic Arts, Epic Mega Games, Chaos Works, Firefight.
Jackson reporting. I'm near the coordinate quadrant on Chalk. Test area for any resistance. You mean destroy. The council trusts you to do what must be done. I seem to understand each other perfectly. Continue to the next sector.
Hello one and all, and welcome back to yet another episode of the 8-Bit Academic. If you don't know by now, my channel is basically a combination of the various things I love and are passionate about, namely video games and knowledge. Something I should have explained a bit earlier when I started my channel is that I am by nature a very inquisitive and curious person. So I am always reading up about and researching various topics that could be related to anything from history, technology, mythology, religion, science, and even stuff to do with entertainment media, like that video I made about how Jackie Chan almost got killed by the Hong Kong triads. Link down below if you haven't watched it yet. Go give me some views because Lord knows, I need the support. Combined with my love for video games, especially the janky retro ones, I guess it's not hard to tell by now that I am indeed a super geek. Nerd! I indeed do have way too many interests, which are probably not useful, but which does prove the stereotype of gamers just being a bunch of basement-dwelling incels with low IQ as being completely false. While I do live in a basement, splitting my time between drooling over cute anime girls and playing an unhealthy amount of video games, I would like to think my IQ is pretty high and that I'm fairly well read on a number of different topics. I've never tested this though, but I like to think there's absolutely nothing wrong with living in your own fantasy world to boost your self-confidence.
I'm built different.
Oh shit!
Anyway, I personally think that both the topic and the game I'm covering today are extremely rare unless you have gone into questionable corners of the internet like I have. I would wager that most people have never heard of either of these unless they are crazy like me. There honestly isn't much available online about the video game feature of today's episode, an indie title from the year 1996 called Firefight. It was an isometric shoot-'em-up video game with pre-rendered 3D sprites, wherein you play as a mercenary hired to destroy a group of interplanetary rebels that want to overthrow the Galactic Council with your shiny, high-tech combat spaceship. At least I think that's what the story is about. The story in the game itself is quite vague, and since it was an indie title in a time when gaming wasn't as popular as it is now, it was difficult to find much information about it online. I first came across it thanks to the Windows 95 Game Sampler 2 disc, which I have definitely mentioned way too many times on this channel, and I'm probably going to mention it a lot more in the future, because it literally was my very first introduction to PC gaming. For years since my childhood, I had tried to remember and find this rare little gem online with the express desire to play it again for my regular nostalgia fix, with it only ever being available on malware and Trojan virus-filled pirate sites and myabandonware.com, which is a website dedicated to cataloging and archiving many old video games from past decades that faded into obscurity, never got any updates or remasters, and have become abandoned, hence the name of the website. It's too bad that Firefight isn't more known, because it's actually pretty awesome, despite the need for pagan rituals and blood sacrifices to the great old ones to get it to work on a modern PC.
What are you guys? You guys must actually be
It was developed by a small Polish-based studio called Chaos Works, produced by Epic Mega Games, now called Epic Games, which are responsible for titles like the Gears of War series and Fortnite, and the genius minds behind the Unreal Engine, as well as eventually being published by Electronic Arts, better known today as EA Games, in a time before they became the greedy corporate supervillains they are now.
You will never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy.
Now that we have all that gaming history out of the way, let's get into today's topic, shall we? In this week's episode, I would like to talk about something that involves a handful of subtopics, which may be related to one another or not, depending on how deep the rabbit hole goes. It involves UFOs, conspiracies, government cover-ups, military technology, a possible pseudoscience but maybe not really, and the invention of flying machines such as aircraft and drones. But let's pick a general starting point, one which most people are already familiar with, and one which I have covered before and to this day is probably my favorite rabbit hole to go down, and that is the topic of the UFO or UAP, or for the dummies out there, unidentified flying objects and unidentified aerial phenomena. Now, I have already made at least one video on the topic so far, linked down in the description below if you haven't seen it. And boy, do I plan to cover more of it in the future, because admittedly, I live for this shit. But today, I would like to discuss a few UFO related incidents that may actually have a legitimate explanation of what they might really be. Since the early 1980s, in many countries around the world, there have been reports of a UFO with a rather recognizable but also peculiar shape. Up until this point, most UFOs or UAPs were reported as having saucer shapes, which led to the concept of the so-called flying saucer. But that is until people started to report on what they would describe as black triangles, with some of the most famous cases being that of the Belgian UFO wave from 1989 to 1992, the Phoenix Lights in 1997, seen over Phoenix, Arizona in the United States, a handful of sightings in the UK between the early 90s and 2000s, with the most recent one from 2023 in Wolverhampton, which was dubbed by local news as the Dudley Dorito. And if one goes back in time a bit to the year 1951, the infamous triangular-shaped Lubbock Lights that was spotted over the city of Lubbock, Texas in the USA, just to mention a handful of such claims of triangular-shaped UFOs that have circulated in different countries around the world over the decades. Unlike other UFO sightings, however, there might actually be a possible explanation for these triangular-shaped craft, which can be found in both the many declassified and classified projects that involve the advancement of military technology. One simply has to look at the various triangular-shaped aircraft that have been developed or at least attempted since World War II. The German Air Force were the first to design a prototype for what they called the Flying Wing in the late stages of the Second World War with the Horten HV-2 and eventually the Horten Ho 229. Unfortunately though, neither of the prototypes were ever mass-produced by the German military at the time, nor did they ever fly on missions, with the Horten Ho 229 never making it past even the concept stage. After the end of the war, during Operation Paperclip, when the US government shipped a bunch of Nazi scientists over to begin work on jet propulsion and rocket programs for the American military, the designs for these flying wing type aircraft were also a major interest for the US Air Force. By the 1960s, the US Air Force had developed the first supersonic stealth plane called the SR-71 Blackbird, which, while not necessarily triangular shaped, it would become the basis of stealth aircraft in the decades to come. it could travel at speeds of 2,300 miles per hour or 3,705 kilometers per hour, reaching Mach 3, which is essentially 3 times the speed of sound. It would fly mostly undetected by enemies like the Soviet Union and completely unknown to the civilian public at large for the next 4 decades until it was decommissioned in 1998. However, it wasn't the only stealth plane developed and deployed by the US Air Force, with the also now declassified Northrop B-2 Spirit bomber and the Lockheed F-11-7 Nighthawk being 2 other famous examples that also take a more triangular shape. Now, it can easily be argued that none of these stealth aircraft I mentioned resemble any of the images and videos of the Black Triangle UFOs, and that is a very good point. But remember, earlier I mentioned the words declassified and classified. Well, now we head down the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories and internet rumors yet again, my dear viewers, and boy does it get pretty weird. Only this time, there might actually be some evidence to back it up, though the evidence itself is quite vague at best. So far, all the examples I have shown are of aircraft that have been declassified for some time now, but what about those that are still classified? Obviously, it is within a nation's best interests to not reveal any of its military secrets, since you never know who might be listening. So it makes sense that many of these so-called black projects are kept extremely quiet. But it is fun to latch onto a few internet rumors and speculate as to what might be going on behind the scenes of the ever-advancing field of military technology. That leads us to the next 2 alleged stealth aircraft of the United States military, which seem to resemble the Black Triangle UFOs a lot more. The first one is called the SR-91 Aurora, which doesn't exist, or so they say. It is a supposed hypersonic reconnaissance aircraft with stealth capabilities that can reach up to speeds of Mach 5 or 5 times the speed of sound, which since the 1980s was claimed to be the successor to the SR-71 Blackbird. But according to experts and even the US Air Force themselves, it simply does not exist and was all based off a rumor that got out of hand. Yeah, sure. Next thing they'll tell us that UFOs are just drones. That being said though, the actual successor to the SR-71 Blackbird may in fact be the Lockheed SR-72 Darkstar, which was featured in the 2022 movie Top Gun Maverick, starring Tom Cruise. However, unlike the film, the real Darkstar, which looks even more like a friggin' spaceship than its predecessor, is said to be an unmanned drone that may hypothetically reach up to speeds of between Mach 6 and Mach 10, which is 6 to 10 times the speed of sound, or roughly between 4,000 miles per hour or 6,437 kilometers per hour and 7,000 miles per hour or 12,348 kilometers per hour. Don't quote me on that, I'm bad at maths.
No, you are so dumb. You are really dumb. For real.
I say hypothetically because until now the Darkstar hasn't been tested yet, with its first test flight being set for this year. If it has happened by the time of this video's release, please let me know in the comments and link to a video if there is one, because that would be absolutely awesome to see. The second mystery aircraft that doesn't exist apparently is called the TR3B Black Manta, and boy, the rumors surrounding this one are wild. It's allegedly meant to be yet another reconnaissance stealth plane or drone that, according to some wild theories, doesn't use conventional methods of propulsion such as internal combustion engines, but instead relies on anti-gravity technology to create movement or propulsion. And while that might sound utterly ridiculous and completely pseudoscientific, or a concept that would exist within a sci-fi world, You would be surprised, as I was, when you learn of the multiple anti-gravity patents and alleged experiments that have been taking place since the 1950s. Just a brief explanation though, gravity is essentially the attractive force between objects. It holds you to the planet and keeps the planet orbiting around the sun, since each celestial body, at least in our solar system as far as we can tell, such as the planets and moons that orbit these planets, all have their own gravitational pull, but are in turn affected by the gravitational pull of our solar system's star, aka the sun. So as you might imagine, the idea of reducing, cancelling or protecting against this effect of gravity is highly appealing for many within the scientific community, as anti-gravity technology would revolutionize both space exploration and energy production. It would reduce the energy demands of travel and transportation by massive amounts. But before we could even implement such a revolutionary but also controversial technology, however, we'd have to drastically alter our understanding of physics and find ways to overcome the gravitational pull of our planet as well as other celestial bodies that inhabit the universe. But all this talk about anti-gravity is best suited for a future video, where I will be able to go into the topic a bit deeper. That sounded very wrong, but here we are. All you need to know for now is that, at least for the United States military, the concept of anti-gravity technology has been of great interest for quite some time. And as I mentioned earlier, there are said to have been experiments as well as numerous patents taken out since the 1950s that attempted to unlock the secrets of anti-gravity, with a few alleged breakthroughs along the way, such as the Russian physicist Evgeny Podkletnov claiming to have successfully tested a device that shields an object from gravity back in 1992. The experiment involved levitating a superconducting disk above a magnet. Up until now though, no one, including NASA researchers, have been able to replicate this experiment in the nearly 2 decades since that time. Or in 1960, a research engineer by the name of Martin N. Kaplan, who worked at Ryan Aeronautical Company in San Diego, USA, had supposedly conducted anti-gravitational experiments which yielded the promise of impulses, accelerations, and decelerations 100 times the pull of gravity. There are many more I could mention, but unfortunately, none of the reported experimental breakthroughs published during the 1950s and 1960s, and even up to today, have ever been recognized by both the US and international aerospace community. Or at least, that's what the government wants you to think. There are even a handful of scientific institutions that are involved in anti-gravitational research, such as the Research Institute for Advanced Study, which is associated with Skunk Works, which in turn are a part of the American aerospace and defense contractor Lockheed Martin. There is also the Aerospace Research Laboratories at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, as well as the Gravity Research Foundation. To take you even deeper down the rabbit hole, there is an alleged secret program that existed during World War II, wherein the Nazis also conducted research into anti-gravity propulsion in order to develop what they called Wunderwaffe, or wonder weapons. While some Wunderwaffe did end up being developed, like the V-2 rocket, the flying wing aircraft I mentioned earlier in the video, and the Messerschmitt Me-262, which was literally the first jet engine aircraft in history, there are more extraordinary claims of them having also designed or developed craft that were capable of anti-gravity propulsion like the Glocker or Flying Bell, as well as the so-called Nazi flying saucers, which were also fueled by reports of Allied fighter pilots encountering UFOs or UAPs, which they dubbed as Foo Fighters, and even claims by individuals like German engineer George Klein, claiming that such designs had been developed during the Nazi era. In more modern times, these claims are pushed quite a lot by famous ufologist Stephen Greer and a few others as well. This now brings us back to the mysterious TR3B Black Manta stealth plane, which may or may not exist and which may be related to the so-called Black Triangle UFO phenomena, with there even being rumors that it was reverse engineered from an actual UFO or supposed crashed alien spaceship. As mentioned earlier, the TR3B Black Manta is alleged to use an anti-gravity propulsion drive, which was acquired during one of the many so-called UAP/UFO crash retrieval programs, which I'm sure many of you have seen mentioned in the news with all the US Senate hearings regarding the need for disclosure about these unidentified aerial phenomena that have been cited for decades around the world. Who had UFOs are real and always have been on their calendar of weird shit to expect in the 21st century.
Harmanım, baba nerede çarşafım? Gördüğüm bu paketler benim dermanım. Hoppa yavaşça açıldı fermanım. Sakın.
The TR3B Black Manta is where reports of UAP performing seemingly impossible aerial maneuvers intersect with stories about very real aircraft that may be hidden among the numerous so-called black projects that various military contractors around the world may be involved in. There are lots of claims all over the internet about the TR3B's anti-gravity drive, most of which include using nuclear power to rotate highly pressurized mercury to produce plasma, and in turn a gravitational field which allows the Black Manta to be able to perform impossible feats in the air which no modern aircraft can do. Most stories about the TR3B's development revolve around Operation Paperclip, which I've mentioned quite a few times before on this channel, which was a now declassified program that saw the United States absorb more than 1,500 German scientists and engineers at the end of World War II to continue work on various defense technologies. As mentioned earlier in this video, there have been quite a number of myths and conspiracies about advanced Nazi technologies which were born in the years after World War II, and as the folklore surrounding this anti-gravity platform matured over the years, it eventually became mixed up in the claims of the Nazi Wunderwaffe, or wonder weapons, which I alluded to earlier in the video. Despite how silly these claims sound, there's actually some evidence to substantiate elements of them. For example, an anti-gravity drive of the sort believers claim that powers the TR3B would require massive amounts of power production, more than we could possibly produce with current aviation engines. But then again, Lockheed Martin does have a patent for containerized cold fusion reactors they say could be small enough to fit inside the fuselage of an F-16 fighter jet. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. The most extreme and perhaps unbelievable aspects of the TR3B could potentially be explained by the work of one aerospace engineer who is reportedly now employed by the US Space Force. In 2020, the US Navy filed a series of extremely unusual new patents pertaining to the sort of seemingly science fiction technology found in the claims about the TR3B Black Manta. These patents cover a wide range of topics, from gravitational wave generators to space-time modification weapons, and they all have one thing in common, or rather, one person, Dr. Salvatore Cesar Pais. According to Pais' official biography, he spent time as a NASA graduate research fellow and advanced concepts analyst with Northrop Grumman. the Department of the Navy Strategic Systems Program, and now, according to reports, he's with the US Space Force. So far, it's been confirmed that the Navy has poured at least $466,000 into helping advance Pai's work since 2017. Much of the work has subsequently been made public in the form of 3 patents filed by the Navy. The first, which came in 2016 with the title Craft Using an Inertial Mass Reduction Device, with the 2 that followed being titled Piezoelectricity Induced High Temperature Superconductor, and the last patent being High Frequency Gravitational Wave Generator. The idea being that if Dr. Pai is able to pull off these inventions, it will grant the US Navy and Army the ability to develop military vehicles like ships, submarines, aircraft, and armored ground vehicles with a virtually limitless supply of fusion energy, as well as a proposed concept to develop what he refers to as a space-time modification weapon, which can allegedly alter or manipulate space-time itself. I would 100% love to try whatever he has been smoking. Now, while it's pretty easy to disregard these ideas as complete and utter nonsense, it must be noted that Dr. Pai does have some very noteworthy supporters, including the Chief Technology Officer of the US Naval Aviation Enterprise, Dr. James Sheehy. With all that being said though, these patents wouldn't explain the United States allegedly having this technology in the 1990s or prior, as many anti-gravity tech believers would claim. In fact, there is no evidence to suggest that any of these patents or similar ones have manifested in physical technology even today. But believers will tell you that the United States has been working to learn how these systems function for decades and may only be revealing their efforts by way of patents to get ahead of foreign UAP reverse engineering programs of countries like China or Russia, which supposedly may be on the verge of a breakthrough or some form of public disclosure. The work of Dr. Salvatore Pai may ultimately yield incredible results someday, but for now, there's little evidence to back up his claims, or that his patents may even work the way he says they will. While Dr. Pai's work may not be directly related to TR3B Black Manta sightings or those of the so-called Black Triangle UFOs, there does exist one patent that many people within the UFO community will say is indeed related, and which was filed in 2004 by an inventor named John St. Clair. This patent is often pointed to as evidence that the technology discussed in TR3B or Black Triangle UFO stories is real. Kinda. St. Clair has filed numerous patents over the years, many of which relate to seemingly alien technologies and many of which are now officially listed as abandoned. Some of these other patents include a training system for walking through walls,
Right.
a magnetic vortex wormhole generator, a full body teleportation system, a remote viewing amplifier, and a water energy generator. To date though, none of these patents have resulted in actual working prototypes, and that's not without precedent. As patent attorney Michael O'Brien explains on his website dedicated to helping inventors patent their work, generally speaking, a working model isn't necessary in order to receive a patent. In other words, just because you have received a patent for your sex robot 3000 that is indistinguishable from a real woman doesn't necessarily mean that it is proof that it will indeed be capable of performing that way, or that the invention itself is actually feasible or practical. Likewise, Ericsson Law Group, another firm that helps get inventions patented, explains explicitly on their website that you are not legally required to create a prototype before filing a patent application, which means these guys can just hand out patents like free condoms at the local clinic without actually needing any physical proof that the proposed invention idea actually works. I should start filing for some patents, man. Sounds like easy money. St. Clair isn't even the first to attempt to patent technology that seemingly exists only in the realm of science fiction. Patents that have been filed for inventions that seem to be based directly on UFO reports actually date back decades. So while there are certainly patents out there that seem to suggest the United States has been reverse engineering UFO technology, none of these patents appear to be the smoking gun they're often suggested to be. However, it's important to remember that dismissing many of these patents is not the same as dismissing verified reports of black triangles in the sky, whether they are attributed to the mythical TR3B Black Manta project or not. And with all these US Senate hearings of alleged crash retrieval programs being all the rage now, one can only wonder if there is actually some truth to the tale or if it's all just one big psyop conducted by various three-letter intelligence agencies to distract us from something even more secretive. As for the TR3B Black Manta and its relation to the sightings of triangular-shaped UFOs, my inner nerd really hopes that it is real and that it would only be a matter of time before it gets declassified and revealed to the public, because man, that would be freaking awesome to see. But now the question is posed to you, my dear viewers. What do you think? Is the anti-gravity spy plane known as the TR3B Black Manta real? Do you think it could be the same thing that so many people have claimed to see in the skies around the world? Or could those have just been regular weirdly shaped drones like the ones that flew over New Jersey in the United States towards the end of 2024? And what about anti-gravity propulsion? Do you think that someday we may possibly invent technology that can manipulate our planet's gravitational pull? Leave a comment down below and let me know your thoughts. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.